Now, COP29, as you know, Brad, just around the corner, the Philippines as well, hosting the Loss and Damage Fund. With these developments, tell us about your expectations in terms of exacting climate justice from those who are ultimately accountable.
Well, this is probably one of the most complicated elements of the global climate change conversation, because loss and damage really means liability and compensation. It was the United States that refused to use the term liability and compensation because the United States' view is that liability is a legal concept. We create a legal obligation if you admitted liability. So they and other rich countries didn't want to use that term. So starting from that premise that loss and damage is about liability and compensation, we're talking about literally trillions of dollars of transfers that have to happen to make people whole for the damage they've experienced. Let's think about it in terms of a legal matter. I'm a lawyer. If I go to court and sue somebody for compensation for harm, the court should award me the full amount to compensate me for my harm. And sometimes they will award more punitive damages. That's the scale of the problem we're facing. Now, the amount of money that's being made available by wealthy countries to transfer to poor countries in loss and damage fund is tiny. It's somewhere on the scale of 1/1000th of the amount due. So the Philippines is going to have a very important role. This is a really important obligation they've taken on. Fortunately, the Philippines has been, from the outset of early climate talks, there have been some famous interventions by Philippine government officials. And we do expect the Philippines to stand up to wealthy countries and demand that they pay their fair share.
But talk to us about the roadblocks there. I mean, we all know what should happen. We do know as well that the Philippines has one of the loudest, if not the loudest voice of vulnerable nations out there on trying to exact accountability. But there are roadblocks here. There are certain institutions that might just get in the way because of their bias to more developed countries.
Yeah, I mean, if you're referring to the World Bank, which has a major role in the loss and damage fund, I think that's something to be concerned about, because who are the shareholders of the World Bank? They are the most developed countries, the countries with the biggest economies, and naturally they would be concerned about essentially what their bosses think. There's also the issue of who should pay. Now, when the Paris Agreement was signed, and even farther back when the Rio Agreement was signed, the earliest climate change agreement, China was a developing country. China is now the second biggest economy in the world. It has huge cash reserves. It is now the world's biggest emitter by a factor of 2, so twice as much as the United States is being emitted from China, and it's catching up to the U.S. as a historical emitter. But they say they have no obligation to provide any funds for loss and damage. They're saying that we are a developing country and we should be exempted. So there are all sorts of blockages here. The U.S. Congress is full of Republicans who don't admit that climate change is real. We have Donald Trump that says climate change is a hoax. We have the rise of right-wing populist parties in Europe that are discouraging governments from putting in the amount of money they should, because Europe is also historically a huge emitter. And then we have a country like China that's saying we're going to give zero for the loss and damage fund. So yes, huge institutional blockages, but I think that the demands from people around the world are going to overcome those. The question is, how fast will they overcome them, and what will happen in time to help them?